think we are much better at filtering than we think, because never in the history of information has anybody had to cope with the quantity of information that we are dealing with at the moment. And so I think I would say I don't think it's all bad news. And what I am going to talk about is like when everything is a mess, when everything just seems really overwhelming and complicated, and like lots of different things are happening at once. How can you talk about complex stories in complex times? And how can you kind of give people things to relate to? And like specifically, I'm gonna like boil this down to something kind of just like try and make it as kind of straightforward as possible. It's kind of, what are the hooks to hang ideas on? How do you find those hooks? How do you make them? Who are the people who help you to hammer those hooks into the wall, right? And I suppose I'm like partly coming at this as a person who has worked on the internet for a lot of years. And in 2016, like literally, I think the week after Donald Trump was elected, I had a really interesting chat with someone who worked at a telecoms company, and his job was doing like the security monitoring. So the thing that he did was he basically listened to what people were talking about all over the world in order to work out where the threats were. And he was saying in 2016 things started to look really different. Prior to that, around kind of political messaging particularly, what would happen is there would be like 2 or 3 narratives that were attached to a candidate. But then a thing that Trump did that no one had ever seen previously is he had hundreds of narratives. He was tweeting constantly about literally everything. And that a thing that this person who worked in the security had seen is that what was starting to happen is people who had never had a shared interest previously were starting to be interested in the same things. But that point of interest might be teeny tiny. It might be an individual tweet from Trump that resonated with a particular thing that they thought about, and they had no interest at all in the rest of his policies, but they were like very strongly aligned to a single thing. And I think this is one of the really complicated things that technology allows, but I think it's worth thinking about how to exploit the idea that it's not always possible to get people to see all the sides of a story, and particularly not when the things that we're looking at and thinking about might be moving invisibly. They might seem very intangible and hard to see. And I don't know if everybody saw this, but I shared this project with you on the Slack. And so this is an artist called James the Bridal, who does lots of work kind of bringing technology into reality. And about this, I think this work might be about 10 years old now, maybe not quite that old. But one of the things that it's exploring is that the drone pilots kind of have no idea of how drones are instantiated in a place. Like, you know, they're in their tiny rooms basically playing a game, and that actually these are real aeroplanes that are flying over real bits of territory, and they leave the shadows and the physical footprints. And it's like a really interesting example of how lots of the things we think of as information feel like they're intangible and invisible and hard to sort of hold on to, but they might leave these kinds of trails or the shadows. And so if I just kind of leave those two thoughts with you as we go through kind of a much more, I guess, practical review of some of the work I did at Dot Everyone, where kind of, I suppose the reason this is really pertinent is what I was trying to do there is tell stories about things that no one can see. Like the way technology is changing our lives, the way we think about things, the way we understand things, the way we commune. It's invisible, it's gradual. The data moves in kind of mysterious ways. And I spent a long time trying to work out how to sort of, as a part of that, how to render things that maybe didn't seem very urgent to people because they weren't happening yet or they weren't visible yet, how to make them visible. And a lot of the stuff I'm about to talk about is work I did with Cassie, who I think has opinions on this too. But I think the first thing is, it's really worth understanding where you are in a system and who you're talking to and who there is to speak to, right? And so one of the things Cassie did loads of and really helped us with was understand who the world around us was, who else was speaking, who we ought to be speaking to, who we ought to be lifting up, where there was noise, where there wasn't enough noise. The act of understanding the gaps was really important, because even though we might feel we had an important thing to say, actually the most important thing was understanding who else was speaking, and fitting into that. The next is kind of not thinking everybody wants to hear you. That actually, if you've got a complicated message, who are the other people who can speak to it? Where is the credibility that you can find by, I don't know, allowing trusted advocates and experts to like giving a platform to their work in order to raise up the kinds of things that you're doing. The next one is, it's kind of, don't just tell the story that you want to tell the story in a way that other people would like to hear. And I do a lot of policy work. Actually, I'll come back to that in a moment, because like the next thing is particularly when you're dealing with like complicated ideas, other people are going to imagine them differently. And sometimes that's amazing. Sometimes it might be helpful to be a bit controlling about that and to help them imagine the thing you would like them to imagine. And to understand that you need to tell stories differently to reach different groups. And so I do a lot of policy work, and basically when I'm doing policy work, I want a message to land in a way that when a minister is walking down a corridor and has half a minute prior to walking into a room, their aide is able to say, this is about this, right? You're looking at 9 words, you're looking at things that are easy to comprehend, easy to think about, easy to read, that a very the senior important person can be briefed on the hoof, because there's no time there for complexity or argument. It's all about boiling things down, like again and again and again. Like, I do loads of knitting, and if you knit a jumper and put it in the wash, it felts and it turns into like a really tiny condensed version of the jumper. And so there are certain audiences for whom that is really important. There are others for whom actually you want to start saying things in completely different ways. And like, one of the things I really feel passionate about is that we need other kinds of people to be having the visions that turn into tech. And we did some work around if you open up different like the opportunity to write sci-fi and tell different stories to different audiences, actually those stories might inspire different people to do different things. That actually, that's like completely the opposite to this approach here, where you're boiling it down and boiling it down. Here you're like opening it up and opening it up and trying to just kind of plant little possibilities and opportunities that different people can take and do things with over time. And I'm nearly done. So number 4 is like very often when you're trying to make a complicated change, or when you're trying to change a complex system, it really helps to make tiny artifacts that show how a thing could look, because otherwise you're really asking a lot of people to think about things. One of the things we did at Everyone occasionally was to make films that brought to life what maybe a future opportunity could look like, that showed you a different context or a thing you can imagine. This here was a film about the future of the social care that was like based in 2025. Or other times we would sort of design and make little prototypes that just kind of showed how a thing that people couldn't imagine might actually look. And my last point is that I suppose like just the really important thing I'm trying to like, there's like, even when you're trying to tell a really kind of clear and crisp story, when your story is like a lovely gift that you're handing over to another person, and you're asking them to take care of it and treasure it and kind of grow it into something else, you can't be too precious about it. Even though, I've just talked about doing all these things that are about kind of trying to boil down and create your vision, what you really want is for other people to take part. And I think this does speak a little bit to one of the problems that I think progressive politics quite often has, is that we don't think being half in agreement is good enough. We don't think that compromising is good enough. But I think maybe when we're influencing and we're sharing stories and we're telling each other about things, the much more powerful thing is to look at the places where we agree, not the places we disagree, and to think about growing that agreement between us. And so I think, the last thing is, when you're telling a story, when you're sharing a thought, can you make it as easy as possible to give to others and to allow those to uh, join in and shape it and change it? And that's it. Thank you. If I can get out of my slides.